Subscribe to the channel, do it now. News stories every day. Now let's get started. Now, as I stand on my new apartment balcony overlooking the city lights, I can't help but feel a bittersweet gratitude. The heartbreak pushed me to fight for my truth, secure my life, and never again ignore the warning signs of a partner who sees me as a means to an end rather than an equal. The skyline still dazzles, reminding me of how illusions can both enchant and deceive. But this time, I'm more prepared, wiser, if not entirely unscathed. Lucy's story in my life has ended, but mine continues, and I've learned that love in this metropolis can be as fleeting as the billboard lights that flicker on and off, promising a brilliance that can vanish just as quickly as it appears. My wife Heather had always been ruthless in business. She built her career on calculated decisions, cutting losses and making hard calls with the precision of a surgeon. I once admired that about her, but admiration sours when that cold precision is aimed at you. I sat across from her in her glass-walled office, the skyline stretching behind her like a monument to ambition. Everything about her screamed control, the crisp white blazer, the perfectly manicured nails tapping lightly on the desk, the way she leaned back in her leather chair with the kind of smugness that only comes from believing yourself untouchable. She tilted her head slightly, watching me, savoring the moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate smirk, she said the words that would have shattered another man. Ethan, you will be training my boyfriend as your replacement. She let the statement hang there, watching for my reaction, but I gave her nothing. Not a twitch, not a flicker of emotion. If she wanted to show, she was going to be disappointed. After a brief pause, she continued, her voice smooth, professional. After 12 years, we're letting you go. Oh, we. As if there were some faceless board that had come to this decision rather than her personal vendetta. I didn't ask why. That would have been weak. I didn't argue. That would have given her satisfaction. I simply nodded, letting a small, knowing smile touch my lips. Something flickered in her eyes for a second. She had expected more fight, more anger, more desperation. Any of that would have given her the high ground. Instead, she got calm acceptance. People like Heather mistake composure for weakness. They assume that because you don't lash out, you've lost. She had no idea I'd already won 3 months ago. Folding my hands in my lap, I kept my voice even. I'll make sure he's fully trained before I go. She leaned back further, crossing her legs, her smirk widening. She was enjoying this far too much. Good. I knew you'd be professional about it. Too many people get emotional when they're let go. That was rich coming from her. Emotional was exactly how she operated. She just disguised it under layers of ice. The difference between us was that I didn't let emotions make my decisions. I took in the surroundings. Her office, once belonging to her father, Henry, a man who built this company, Harrington Enterprises, from the ground up. He had taught me everything I knew about business. When I married Heather, he treated me like a son. But then he got sick, and before he secured the company's future, he passed away. Heather made it clear she didn't intend to share. It started small, my ideas dismissed in meetings, my authority undermined, key decisions made without me. She didn't fire me outright because she knew she couldn't. Not then. I had too much credibility, so she chipped away, whittling my role until this day when she felt confident enough to push me out entirely. I could only imagine what her new boyfriend thought. Maybe he believed he won something, that she had chosen him over me. He was probably sitting in some coffee shop, gloating about how easy it was to steal my job. Poor bastard. I stood slowly, adjusting the cuffs of my shirt. I assume there's paperwork for me to sign. She shrugged. HR will send everything by the end of the day, she replied, rising from her chair. She walked around the desk, stopping just a foot away from me. I caught a hint of her perfume. Sharp, expensive, the same one she'd worn for years. She was enjoying every second, needing to see me break so she could revel in it. I looked down at her, letting her see no fear. I guess tomorrow will be interesting. Her smirk didn't waver. I'm sure you'll land on your feet, Ethan. Oh, I would. In fact, tomorrow morning when I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an ex-employee, it would be as the new owner. I turned and walked out without another word, feeling her stare boring into my back. The second I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer, Jacob. Papers filed. Board members notified. Meeting set for 9 a.m. Slipping the phone back in my pocket, I exhaled. Heather had played her move. Tomorrow, it would be mine. 3 months prior, I had already started buying out the controlling stake in Harrington Enterprises. Heather thought she was cornering me, but she never realized she was the one being cornered. She had no idea I owned 51% of the shares, no idea I'd quietly gained the board's backing either. While she orchestrated my downfall, I orchestrated a takeover. She'd find out soon enough. The next morning, she believed she had the upper hand, that she'd forced me to train her boyfriend and bow out in disgrace. She expected me to slink into the boardroom humiliated. Instead, I arrived earlier than usual, strolling through Harrington Enterprises as if it was still my turf, because it was. I ran into Ryan, her boyfriend, near the coffee machine. He gave me that smirk I knew so well, the same confidence that Heather had indulged in him. He wore a tailored suit, probably one Heather bought for him, and looked at me like I was yesterday's news. Heather said you'd show me the ropes, he said smoothly. I appreciate you not making this awkward. I bit back a laugh. Poor kid. He had no idea the bomb about to drop. Of course, I replied evenly. We can start with the basics. He nodded, grinned smug. Great. I can't wait to implement some new ideas around here, especially once you're out of the picture. I just smiled back, stepping into the elevator that would take me to the boardroom. Sure thing, Ryan. At 9 a.m., Heather and her new puppet expected to watch me sign off on my own humiliation. But as soon as the meeting started, Jacob walked in with a folder thick with documents. Heather's eyes narrowed. She hadn't called in Jacob. She hadn't summoned any lawyers, so what was happening? Jacob cleared his throat, glancing around at the board members, many of whom I'd already spoken with privately. We're here to address changes in the ownership structure, he announced. Heather's jaw tightened. What ownership changes? Jacob glanced at me and I gave him a small nod. For the last 3 months, a holding company has been quietly acquiring shares of Harrington Enterprises, he explained. This week, it finalized a controlling interest. Effective immediately, the new primary shareholder will assume leadership. Heather stared, confusion turning into alarm, then fury. Whose holding company is this? I rose to my feet, letting the silence weigh for a moment. Mine, Heather. NKT Holdings stands for my initials. I've spent the last months legally purchasing the majority stake you left vulnerable when you alienated so many investors. Now, the board supports my leadership. Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Heather's face turned ashen, her eyes darting to Ryan, who looked equally stunned. That's impossible, she hissed. This is my company. I shook my head slowly. It was your father's company. You're the one who gutted it. You replaced talent with sycophants, alienated clients, and let the share value drop. That allowed me, and the board, to seize an opportunity. She clenched her fists. You can't do this. You can't just. It's done, Jacob cut in. All transactions are above board. The SEC is notified, and this board has convened to ratify the leadership change. One by one, board members expressed their agreement, having already decided behind closed doors. They had enough of Heather's destructive reign. She had undercut them just like she had undercut me. Now they were all too happy to vote in favor of my leadership. Her meltdown was immediate. She hurled accusations, threatened lawsuits, but we'd covered every angle. She turned to Ryan, hoping for support, but he looked more like he wanted to vanish under the table. Ultimately, security was summoned to escort her out. As they led her from the boardroom, her eyes seethed with hatred. This isn't over, Ethan, she spat. Oh, it is, I replied calmly. Goodbye, Heather. She stormed out, Ryan trailing behind like a lost puppy. The instant the door shut, a collective sigh of relief filled the room. I took a seat at the head of the table, the seat Heather once claimed as her throne. In the aftermath, Heather attempted a smear campaign telling anyone who would listen that I had stolen her company, that I was a backstabbing husband who outmaneuvered her for profit. But no one really listened. The employees she cast aside came forward with horror stories of her leadership, or lack thereof. Investors who had lost faith in her found renewed faith in me. Even the media coverage turned against her, painting her as the vengeful CEO who was ironically outsmarted by her own spouse. Ryan tried to salvage his own career, but I had receipts showing how incompetent he truly was. He'd also lost credibility after everyone realized Heather had essentially been grooming him as a puppet. None of the big firms wanted to touch him once it was clear he had no real achievements, just an affair with the former boss. As for me, I spent the next few months rebuilding Harrington Enterprises from the ground up. The employees who had left in despair were invited back. The clients who had walked away were courted anew. We recovered slowly, but we recovered. I introduced fresh ideas, realigned our mission with Henry Harrington's original values, and started turning a profit once more. Hather disappeared from the public eye for a while, rumored to be holed up in some condo she owned. I heard faint whispers about her trying to sue, but her lawyers must have told her there was no case. She had outed herself as a destructive leader who cost the company millions, and I had all the documents to prove it. If she tried to drag me to court, she'd lose and owe more than she had left. In a final poetic twist, I had her personal belongings from the office shipped to her condo, each item carefully boxed. I didn't keep anything that once belonged to her. I wanted no reminders. The day the courier delivered them, I heard she broke down in tears in the lobby, screaming about how she'd get revenge. But revenge on what? She was the one who tried to rid me from my rightful place and ended up losing everything. And so I became the leader Henry Harrington had intended me to be. I wish the old man had lived to see it, but maybe somewhere he was looking down on me, nodding in approval. Heather's affair with Ryan, her attempts to humiliate me by having me train him, none of it mattered now, because in the end she misunderstood me. She thought I was too emotional, too soft. What real power isn't about screaming the loudest or wielding fear. It's about quiet resolve, put out planning carefully, and acting decisively. In the end, I learned two things: that a cunning spouse can become your worst enemy, and that if you keep your mind clear and your heart steady, you can outmaneuver even the most ruthless person. Heather had believed she was unstoppable. I'd shown her that unstoppable is only a myth when you refuse to see the threat right under your nose. I still remember the last conversation I had with her. Days later, when she finally summoned the nerve to call me, she tried to beg, tried to say maybe we could fix things in our marriage. But I just laughed softly, told her I was filing for divorce, and that, ironically, tomorrow might be interesting. Then I hung up. Yes, it was interesting indeed. For me, a brand new chapter. For her, an ending she never saw coming. And that is how I, Ethan, turned my wife Heather's final power play into her ultimate downfall and reclaimed the company she thought she could steal from me.